Listen carefully, because this is the moment most people miss, and once it passes, it never comes back the same way again. There will be a point where he stops seeing you as just another person in his life and starts feeling something he cannot control, cannot explain, and cannot ignore, not because you tried harder, not because you said the perfect words, but because you didn't. Because while others were trying to be chosen, you were simply being yourself. While others were performing, you were present. And that difference is what quietly changes everything. He won't announce it. He won't even fully understand it at first. But something in him will shift. The way he thinks about you, the way he remembers you, the way your absence suddenly feels louder than your presence ever was. And that's when it begins. Not a love story, not a fantasy, but a realization deep, unsettling, and undeniable that you are not someone he can easily replace, forget, or categorize. The question is, what happens when someone finally realizes your value at the exact moment you stop trying to prove it? Recognition, in its truest form, rarely announces itself with noise. It does not depend on grand confessions, dramatic gestures, or perfectly timed words. Instead, it unfolds in the quiet spaces where performance fades and something more honest begins to surface. When he starts to realize you are unlike anyone he has ever known, it does not happen during the obvious moments. It happens in the subtle ones he almost overlooks. It might begin in silence, a pause in conversation where he expects you to fill the gap, to reassure, to entertain, or to seek validation, but you don't. You remain composed, present, and unbothered by the absence of noise. That silence does something unexpected. It forces him to feel instead of react, and in that feeling, something unfamiliar emerges. He notices that you don't rush to impress him. There is no urgency in your energy, no underlying need to secure his attention. Where others may have tried to hold on to his interest through effort or performance, you simply exist as you are. This absence of striving creates a contrast he cannot immediately understand, but he feels it. It lingers in his mind longer than words ever could. Recognition begins to grow in these small, almost invisible moments. The way you respond without overreacting, the way you listen without trying to control the outcome, the way you walk away from what does not align with you, without creating a scene or seeking approval. None of it is loud, yet all of it speaks, and that is where the shift begins. Because he is used to signals that are easy to read, clear expressions of interest, predictable emotional responses, familiar patterns of connection. But with you, the signals are different. They are not absent, but they are not exaggerated either. They exist in a balanced, grounded way that requires him to pay attention on a deeper level. At first, he may not even realize what is happening. He just knows that something feels different when he is around you, and even when he is not. Your presence does not fade quickly from his thoughts. It stays, quietly influencing how he reflects on his own behavior, his own expectations, and even his past experiences. He may find himself replaying moments that seemed simple at the time. A conversation that didn't follow the usual script. A reaction from you that didn't match what he anticipated. A boundary you held without explanation. These moments begin to connect, forming a realization that grows slowly but steadily. The absence of noise becomes the very thing that makes you impossible to ignore, because where there is no distraction, there is clarity, and clarity can be unsettling. It leaves no room for illusion, no space to hide behind assumptions or familiar patterns. He starts to see that what he is experiencing is not based on surface-level attraction or temporary excitement, but something more grounded, something that feels stable yet unknown. This realization does not demand attention, it earns it. It does not push itself forward, it reveals itself over time. And because of that, it carries a weight that louder connections often lack. He begins to understand that what draws him toward you is not something he can easily define or control. It is not about what you say, but how you exist. Not about what you do, but what you don't feel the need to do. And in that absence of effort, there is a presence that feels rare. Recognition, then, is not a single moment, but a quiet accumulation of awareness. It builds slowly, almost imperceptibly, until it reaches a point where it can no longer be ignored. And when it finally becomes clear to him, it does not feel like a discovery, it feels like something he has been sensing all along, now impossible to deny. There is a particular kind of shift that cannot be explained through logic, and yet it is deeply felt. When he begins to realize that something about you is different, it does not come with clarity, it comes with sensation. A quiet, persistent feeling that something has moved within him, even if he cannot point to when or why it happened. He may try, at first, to understand it in familiar terms. Attraction, interest, curiosity, he cycles through these labels, hoping one of them will fully capture what he feels, but none of them seem complete. Because what he is experiencing goes beyond what he has known before. It is not just about wanting to be around you or enjoying your presence. It is something that lingers long after you are gone, something that subtly reshapes how he thinks, how he reacts, and even how he sees himself. This is where the confusion begins, because the mind seeks certainty, and this feeling offers none. It does not follow a clear pattern. It does not behave in predictable ways. One moment he may feel drawn toward you without hesitation, and the next he may feel the urge to pull back, not because he has lost interest, but because he cannot fully understand the depth of what he is experiencing. It unsettles him in a way that is unfamiliar. He is used to emotions that are easy to navigate, feelings that come with clear expectations and known outcomes. But this is different. This feeling carries a weight that he cannot immediately place. It challenges the way he has previously understood connection, because it does not stay on the surface. It moves deeper, touching parts of him he does not usually examine. And that is what makes it so difficult to explain, because it is not just about you, it is about what is happening within him in response to you. He may notice that he becomes more aware of himself around you, the way he speaks, the way he listens, the way he reacts. Things he once did automatically now feel more deliberate. It is as if your presence creates a mirror, reflecting aspects of him that he has never had to confront before. This awareness is not always comfortable, but it is undeniable. At the same time, there is a pull he cannot ignore. Even in moments when he tries to create distance, whether physically or emotionally, something brings his attention back to you, not in an obsessive way, but in a persistent underlying sense that there is something here he has not yet understood. Something that matters, even if he cannot yet define its meaning. This tension between confusion and clarity becomes a central part of his experience. He knows something is different, but he cannot explain why. And because he cannot explain it, he may question it. He may try to rationalize it, to reduce it to something simpler, something more manageable, but the feeling resists simplification. It remains complex, layered, and quietly powerful. What makes this shift so significant is that it does not rely on external validation. It is not dependent on what you say or do in any obvious way. Instead, it emerges from within him as a response he did not consciously choose. And because it comes from within, it carries a sense of authenticity that is difficult to dismiss. He begins to realize that this is not something he can control in the usual ways. He cannot predict it, cannot contain it, cannot easily walk away from it without feeling its absence. And that lack of control forces him to confront a deeper truth that not everything meaningful can be understood through logic alone. Some things must be felt before they can ever be explained. And even then, the explanation never fully captures the experience, so he sits with it, whether he wants to or not. This quiet shift, this unexplainable pull, this sense that something has changed in a way that cannot be undone, and over time, even without clear answers, he begins to accept that what he feels is real, not because he understands it, but because he cannot ignore it anymore. What unsettles him most is not something you actively do, but something you refuse to do. You do not chase. You do not try to convince him of your value. You do not shape yourself into what you think he might prefer. and in a world where he has grown accustomed to subtle performances, people adjusting, proving, seeking approval, your stillness stands out more than any effort ever could. At first, he may not consciously register it. He simply notices that the usual patterns are missing. There is no pressure from you, no hidden urgency beneath your words, no sense that you are trying to secure his attention or keep him engaged at all costs. You respond, you engage, but you do not reach. And that absence of reaching creates a space he is not used to experiencing. He has likely encountered situations where attention came easily, where interest was expressed clearly and often, where he could relax into a predictable rhythm of being wanted. In those situations, there was always an unspoken understanding. If he pulled back slightly, the other person would move closer. If he hesitated, they would reassure. If he gave less, they would compensate by giving more. But with you, that pattern does not exist. If he pulls back, you do not chase. If he hesitates, you do not rush to reassure. If he gives less, you do not increase your effort to fill the gap. Instead, you remain consistent, not distant, not cold, but grounded in yourself. Your energy does not fluctuate based on his actions. And this consistency creates something unfamiliar: accountability. Because now there is no illusion to hide behind. He cannot rely on your effort to carry the connection. He cannot assume that your presence will remain regardless of how little he invests. For perhaps the first time, he is faced with the reality that if something is to grow, it will require something from him. And that realization shifts the dynamic entirely. Your presence begins to feel less like something he can passively receive, and more like something he must consciously meet, not through performance or charm, but through genuine intention. And that is where things become uncomfortable, because being real requires more than being liked. He starts to feel the difference between connections that were maintained through effort on the other person's side, and this one, which exists without force. You are not trying to hold his attention, you simply have it, without asking. And because you are not trying to keep it, he becomes more aware of the possibility of losing it. This awareness does not come from fear you create, but from clarity you embody. You show him without words that your value is not something you negotiate. You do not lower your standards to maintain connection. You do not overextend yourself to prove your worth. And in doing so, you remove the usual dynamics of control and replace them with something far more balanced. He may test it, consciously or unconsciously, pulling back to see if you follow, becoming inconsistent to see if you compensate. But each time, he is met with the same quiet truth: you remain aligned with yourself. And this is where recognition deepens, because your presence is not built on reaction but on self-possession. You are not responding to him in a way that seeks validation. You are responding in a way that reflects who you already are. And that makes your presence feel solid, not fragile. He begins to understand that being with you would not be about managing your emotions or maintaining your interest through minimal effort. It would require presence, consistency, and sincerity, things that cannot be faked for long. And whether he feels ready for that or not, the realization stays with him. Because what you offer is not attention that can be easily gained or replaced. It is something steady, something self-contained, something that exists independently of him. And that independence is what makes your presence so powerful. Not because it demands anything, but because it refuses to settle for less. At some point, the experience of knowing you begins to turn inward for him. What once felt like a simple connection now starts to reveal something far more personal. He is no longer just observing you, he is, in a quiet and often uncomfortable way, observing himself. And this is where the real shift begins. Being around you does not allow him to remain entirely on the surface. There is something about your presence that disrupts his usual ways of avoiding deeper reflection. Perhaps he has spent years moving through connections without ever needing to question his own patterns, his own habits, or the ways he protects himself. But now, without you directly asking anything of him, those patterns begin to rise into awareness. He may start to notice how he reacts when things are not entirely in his control. The urge to withdraw, to create distance, to maintain emotional safety by staying slightly detached. These tendencies may have once served him well, allowing him to navigate relationships without feeling exposed. But now they feel more visible, almost as if they are being quietly illuminated. And what makes this particularly challenging is that you are not forcing this awareness onto him. You are not confronting him, not demanding explanations, not trying to fix or change him. Instead, your steadiness creates a kind of contrast that makes his own